Once upon a time there was a little black boy, and his mammy called him George Washington Rabbit. Now that's a funny name for a little boy, George Washington Rabbit, but somehow it just suited him. He lived with his mammy at the edge of a big cotton field in the South, and right across the field and down the road about a mile lived George Washington Rabbit's granny. He went to see his granny almost every day, and she always gave him something good to take home to his mammy. One day George Washington Rabbit went whistling across the cotton field to see his granny. She gave him a piece of delicious chocolate cake. George Washington Rabbit held it in his little fists all the way home, but when he got home, all he had was a fistful of crumbs. "What's that in your hands, George Washington Rabbit?" asked his mammy. "Cake, mammy." "My goodness," said his mammy. "The next time Granny gives you cake, take some nice big oak leaves and wrap the cake up in them. Put the cake in your hat and put your hat on your head. Then come along home." "All right, mammy." So the next day George Washington Rabbit went whistling across the cotton fields to see his granny. As he neared the cottage, he heard a thump, thump, thump. His granny was churning butter, and she gave him a pound of it to take home. George Washington Rabbit thought of what his mammy had said. "I'll remember what Mammy said to do, and do just what she told me to." He found some big oak leaves and wrapped them around the butter. Then he put the butter in his hat. He put his hat on his head and went along home. It was a very hot day, and there wasn't any shade over the big cotton field. Pretty soon the butter began to melt. It ran down his forehead and then over his face. When he got home, his mammy just looked at him. "What's that all over you?" she asked. "Butter, mammy." "My goodness gracious," she said. "The next time Granny gives you butter, take it down to the spring and cool it in the water, and then hurry home." "All right, mammy." The next day George Washington Rabbit went whistling across the cotton field and down the road to see his granny. She had a tiny little puppy for him. George Washington Rabbit thought of what his mammy had told him, so he took the puppy down to the spring. When George Washington Rabbit reached the spring, he dipped the puppy into the water. The puppy didn't like it, but he dipped it in again and again. Then he went along home, holding the puppy in his arms. "What have you there?" asked his mammy. "A puppy?" "My goodness, let me see that poor puppy. It's all shivery." The way to bring a puppy home is to tie a string around its neck and come home slowly, leading the puppy. "All right, mammy." Next day George Washington Rabbit went whistling across the cotton field to see his granny. Halfway down the road he smelled something good. Hot homemade bread. His granny gave him a loaf to take home. George Washington Rabbit thought of what his mammy had told him. "I'll remember what Mammy said to do, and do just what she told me to." He took a piece of string and tied it around the middle of the loaf of bread, and went along home, dragging it behind him. "My goodness," said his mammy when he got home. "What's that thing you're dragging in the dirt?" "Bread, mammy." "Won't you ever learn anything at all? I'm through telling you how to bring things home that Granny gives you. Next time I'm going to see Granny, and you will stay at home." The next day his mammy put on her plaid shawl and told George Washington Rabbit to stay right on the front porch while she went to Granny's. She had baked 3 beautiful big apple pies and set them on the porch steps to cool. How he did love apple pie! He looked at them longingly. His mammy saw the look, and she said, Now, George Washington Rabbit, you be careful and don't step in those pies." George Washington Rabbit sighed deeply, and as his mammy's gay shawl disappeared through the cotton fields, he thought of what his mammy had told him. And he did remember, too. He stayed on the porch, and he didn't go near the pies. In a little while his mammy came home, and when she found him there and saw the pies, I wonder if you could guess what she did. She took George Washington Rabbit right into the house and cut him the biggest piece of apple pie you have ever seen. Then his mammy smiled at him and said, "You know, George Washington Rabbit, I knew you could remember if you only tried hard enough."